All right, welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 12th of February, 2025, and this is the SIG Cloud Provider office hours meetings. SIG Cloud Provider is a sub-project at Kubernetes SIGs, and as such, we follow their meeting guidelines, which can basically be summarized as please treat each other as you would expect to be treated, or explicitly so, please be kind to each other. And if you'd like to talk, please raise your hand and I will call on you. Okay, so before we get into today's agenda, I would like to give an opportunity for any sub-project to give us an update if they would like. So does anyone have a sub-project update they would like to share? I'm not seeing any hands going up or people unmuting, so let us move on then. So the only agenda item that I really wanted to bring up today was the annual SIG report, which will be due. They would like to have it done by the end of the week. And I've basically gone through and took the template that they gave us and added some details to it. So in the, what work did the SIG do this year that should be highlighted? We basically just highlighted this draft enhancement that we've been working on for the modular testing stuff. Um, I didn't know if any, hey Theo, I didn't know if any sub-projects wanted to advertise needing help here. It hasn't been an issue that's come up before, but I figure if anyone would like to advertise a project that are looking for more maintainers, we could add it here. And then in terms of the community-wide updates, I included the talk that Bridget and Chris gave at KubeCon Paris, and then the talk that Bridget and I gave at KubeCon Salt Lake City. I wasn't sure if we had any cloud provider activities that happened maybe at like the KubeCon in Asia. I should probably go look again and see. If anybody else has talks kind of around cloud provider that they gave this year or would like to be included, please, happy to add them here. Then the only KEP work that we really had done in 2024, aside from some minor housekeeping, was the completion of the 2395, removing the in-tree providers. So that was a big one. We went into stable there and it's pretty much completed at this point. I did have to kind of do a little cleanup here on the retired projects because we are working to retire cloud provider sample and it is currently being advertised as deprecated. We just need to get it archived at this point. And also, for some reason, the API server network proxy didn't show up on the continuing list. I'm not sure why, because I checked the SIG's YAML and it appears in there in the proper places. But I think probably this year we'll have to go look at the SIGs.yaml and fix up some things there because we still list the extraction migration project as a sub-project. And I think now that we're completing the extraction migration, we can probably end that sub-project and move the projects under it into the main SIG ownership. So then I went through all the docs and checked everything just to make sure everything's up to date, and it all pretty much is. So I will leave this open until, I'll leave it as work in progress until Friday, and then maybe on Friday, if we don't have any more additions to it, we can mark it as ready to go and get some help merging it. So does anybody have questions or comments about the 2024 annual report? And I guess if everything looks good here to you, please go ahead and feel free to give a +1 there. Walter, welcome. I was just going through the 2024 annual report and good timing on your part. I didn't know if there was anything specifically about the API server network proxy that we wanted to include here. So I highlighted the draft enhancement we started for CCM testing, but I didn't know if there were any features or anything specific we wanted to talk about with respect to API server network proxy. And you don't have to answer now, I'll leave this open till Friday if you want to come back or something.
So we added a new way of determining connection count using leader election. That's probably the only real. And we put out several security releases. That's probably about it for that particular system.
Okay, what was the first one again?
We came up with a way to determine. So it used to be you would hard code the leader or the server count, and then we would have a polling system to determine if that number had changed. We now use leader election, or we now have an option that someone can use leader election, so that you actually have a more definitive answer.
Okay, cool. That is something that definitely I think probably is worth highlighting here. And do you know, were there any talks about the API server network proxy that we might want to highlight with links here?
I didn't give any. I have a vague memory that someone unrelated to the project gave a KubeCon talk about it, but I don't actually remember. I didn't do any, and I wasn't there, and I didn't see the talk that was given. So
Okay. I'm just going to try and make some notes here because I'll go back and try and find some links and whatnot to add in here.
yeah, it was. I would love to take credit, but it was either you or Bridget who pointed me to the fact that there was this talk that that wasn't actually one of us doing it.
Right. I remember that, and it was at like KubeCon in Asia, but I don't remember which one it was. So I'll make a note to go look that up.
You have a better memory than I do. I, for some reason, had thought it was like Detroit, but all right.
I mean, maybe it was. Maybe my memory's gone. You know, who knows? Okay, thank you. Anything else people want to comment about this before we move on? Okay. So back to our regular agenda here. Looks like we've grown a new topic here. So Joel, you've had a request for refreshing cloud provider data. Please take it away.
Yeah, so I had a request come through. Um, Basically, in many clouds, there are ways that you can go and circumvent the immutable infrastructure pattern that we try to promote. And that means something like changing the instance type or in vSphere, adding more CPUs or memory. The kind of stuff that gets put on the node when you do the initialization loop in CCM. And I've been pushing back on this, saying this sounds like a bad idea. Like there was a thought about, oh, what if we just retainted the node and then CCM would reinitialize it? Does anyone know if there's any like good write-up or previous discussion around why we don't continuously reconcile um, that kind of cloud data that I could kind of push onto this RFE to say, look, this has already been discussed. You know, here's all the reasons that upstream have concluded. Please don't make me do this kind of thing.
So it's not a definitive answer, and I wish we had the right person here. Uh, it would eventually cause problems with Google. I don't, but I think the more immediate ones we've seen is actually Amazon. So Amazon with large clusters already complains that we make the cloud calls too often and we run customers out of quota.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this request specifically came through on vSphere, and I kind of was like, yeah, we don't have a way to know when changes have happened on vSphere, so we would just have to poll, right, and just periodically do it. And
Oh, as far as I know, we have to pull on most cloud providers. I mean, I have repeatedly made requests, even of my own cloud provider, of hey, could we implement Watch? It'd be really nice if we had Watch on some of these APIs. I don't know of a cloud provider that provides a Watch.
no. But at least when it's like the node comes up and it's uninitialized, it's a run once, right? Like we do it once per node, and we know then it's kind of done. So for them to then be coming and say, well, what if you just did it periodically?
Uh,
You just end up with like, I'm going to guarantee this data is up to date, but actually there's an hour delay. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like a bad idea to me.
Yeah, I mean, I wish. Well, we used to have a technical. Sorry, I'll quickly answer and then hand it over to Elmico. Sorry, I just saw your hand go up. We used to, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. We used to have a really good technical Amazon rep here, and I know from Amazon, we like you can try and find the issue. They kept asking for us to provide sort of a fuse or a rate limiter, so specifically on cloud provider, because they were seeing a lot of problems. And then, of course, once we started looking into that, we started kind of getting the idea of, hey, is there a way for us to do preferential rate limiting? Because obviously some queries are more important than others. And I mean, I think there's something to what's being said here, but I don't think it is a simple request. And with that, I'll turn it over to El Mico.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, unsurprisingly, Joel and I were talking about this internally, and I totally get what's happening here, right? And I think there are some use patterns we should consider, right? Like, namely, if someone is upgrading from an old, let's say someone's upgrading from an old version of Kubernetes before, when they still had in tree, and they migrate to out of tree, or let's say they're upgrading from some scenario where they had like a bugged installation, and they have a node that does not have some label on it because maybe the in-tree provider didn't do that label, or maybe there was an error or something. And then they upgrade to out of tree. And now the out of tree driver, which does use that label, will never reevaluate that node because it's already been initialized, right? So now that node is starting to drift away from like what we consider to be kind of healthy metadata, right? So I was wondering, would it make sense then to start to consider a pattern where on first boot of the cloud provider, it could attempt to reconcile the nodes that it sees, not as part of the main reconciliation loop, but as like okay, do these things all have the proper labels on them, right? And it could take a first chance pass at that only on its first start, and then continue into normal operation. And that would allow us to have a situation where if users started to notice this happening, we could say either restart your CCM deployment, or, during an upgrade, this would happen naturally when the old CCM is stopped and the new one is started. Walter, please.
Uh, so two thoughts. One, I love it. So let me just start with I love it, and then two thoughts that don't sound like I love it, but I do. I actually love it. So the first thought is that I would worry a little bit about what happens if like the controller manager is bouncing, because you could very easily see something where every second it's restarted and it's now killing your quota. Uh, I sort of wonder if there's a variant of this, like something like on upgrade, where instead of it being the first time, every time it comes up, if it notices that it's the first time the controller has ever run, or it's the first time this version of the controller has ever run, that you just sort of do some sort of on upgrade, which just seems like it's a minor refinement of your suggestion.
So possibly we could add a node label that was like CCM data up to date of this version, and then as long as that version doesn't match the version of your binary, it would try to upgrade it. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe, you read my mind. Like, yeah, like if the CCM could add a label that says this was the CCM version the last time I looked at this thing, then if that label doesn't exist, the CCM knows I need to look at it. And if it looks at it and it sees the same version that it's currently at, it's like, okay, maybe I shouldn't look at it. That doesn't solve the problem completely, but it kind of works towards it. Chris and then Joel, I think.
I mean, I was just going to point that out. It doesn't seem to actually solve the request, and it doesn't seem to be it seems to give you less utility than doing it once an hour or whatever. So, yeah, I don't know. But I want to hear what Joel Walter say, I guess.
Yeah, so like obviously part of El Mico's kind of tangent here is around like, okay, we've had an upgrade and now the behavior is different. How often do we think those changes are actually happening? Because I know like the example we've seen, yes, there has been customers saying that we upgraded from in tree to out of tree, and when we did that, the out of tree adds different labels to the in tree did. But now that we're all out of tree, are we making those changes frequently?
I think Walter, you're
So two things, and I think one of them is an easy thing. So I will say we should think about what happens in the case where you're doing actually in the middle of the upgrade. Now last time I talked to the API machinery team, and that wasn't that long ago, they were planning on making some changes to leader election to be able to do ordered selection so that we didn't get rollbacks on upgrade. Because one problem we would have with the suggestion today is you could go n to n plus 1, back to n plus 1. But I believe that is a problem that in an upcoming release, API Machinery is planning on fixing. And then I think Chris had a great point, and maybe I'm kind of trying to slice the cake to get around Chris's point. But what I will say is, I think that it's good to be aware of exactly what problem you're trying to solve. So, and I'm going to go with one is I think the Elmiko's example where I don't think going once an hour really helps when what you're trying to do is change the labels across an upgrade. So I personally think using an upgrade is the right way of approaching that problem. I think if it's more of a once an hour problem, I would think, or potentially could be fixed by a once an hour. I would wonder if we have any other signals, and where I'm coming from, because it may not work, but it helps to understand where I'm coming from, is that as an example, if the underlying machine goes away, then the existing node controller goes, oh, you're not answering pings anymore. So after a certain period of that, I'm going to go into this side logic channel where I go, okay, if you're not answering pings anymore, I'm just going to quickly check with the cloud provider to see if this machine still exists. And so I wonder if, having a deeper understanding of the relevant problem might kind of suggest that there are optimal times to make those calls, and rather than just trying to do it once an hour.
So Kirthan, you've got your hand up next, but I noticed Chris raised his hand. Chris, did you want to respond to Walter? And do you mind, Kirthan, if Chris responds?
Yeah, no, I have like a generic question more. Like, yeah, I can go next after this.
Cool,
Okay.
thank you.
My suggestion was just the only use case I've seen this come up in, and I think would actually be closer to what Walter's talking about, like actually solving the problem that exists, is if we were able to add like a label or flag that if you saw it on the node, then you just reran the initialize loop and then remove that flag or that label. If we could do that, I think then ops teams could be like, yeah, we did an in-place upgrade of this hardware, and I just want you to rescan it or reinitialize the node data.
Yeah, that's a good, even just a flag that allows it that says manually recheck this one, that would help people out, right? Kirthan, please.
Yeah, so we have like a node or I think node control, node lifecycle, which reconciles every 5 minutes all the nodes, right?
Wait, say that again, Kirthan?
So we already have like I'm trying to say because there's already like a node. I had to like confirm it's node or node lifecycle controller, one of the controller, which reconciles all the nodes every 5 minutes. Doesn't that controller help here in this use case?
Well, we would have to. Yeah, go ahead, Walter.
Oh, either one, I think. I believe there is a controller that does that, but specifically the question here is about making cloud provider calls. And so I believe while there is a controller that's reconciling internally to the cluster itself, I don't believe it's making calls out to the cloud provider every 5 minutes.
Okay, because it would make, at least I can tell, I'm from AWS, so I can tell on the AWS issue, maybe like, I'm not sure if it's the same issue or not, but that specific controller, which reconciles every 5 minutes all the nodes, it would make, at least in AWS case, in Cloud Provider AWS case, it would make it easy to call to get the details of the instance. And that's the one which is causing an issue at scale. And I think in 1.27, there was a option added to on how many nodes do you want to reconcile at a time. Like, because before it used to be like, if there are 1,000 nodes in a cluster, it used to like try to reconcile all the 1,000 nodes at a time, like making too many calls in a short burst. So there's a flag added to say how many do you want to process in parallel, like, and that we use like in the large clusters where we say, okay, we don't want to reconcile only 40 nodes at a time or 60 nodes at a time or 20 nodes at a time. Yes, that would help. That would cause the number of nodes to be added at a time, but eventually, like it won't cause too many calls to AWS services and cause throttling issues. But yes,
Yeah, that's good input. I think that also highlights something else though, right? So like if AWS has a good method for returning this, right? Other clouds might not have a good method for returning it, right? So like the implementation would be very uneven in some respects. But honestly, the more we talk about this, and I think about the problem that the user who kind of inspired this problem, or inspired Joel and I at least to start talking about it, like we could also solve this by just implementing something that said if a user can put a specific label on a node if they want the CCM to like double check with the infrastructure to see what's going on there, right? And that wouldn't be an automated way to solve this, like all the upgrade conditions and whatnot, but it would at least allow users who have hit this problem to like have it do it again. And it would be separate than the initialization path, right? It would be like, don't reinitialize the node, just check to make sure everything's correct. Joel, please.
The only thing I will say about that is, and this is typical like end user fashion, is when I suggested, well, if you're going to go make a change to the instance to rescale it to a different instance type or whatever this happened to be, and you know you're making that change, why wouldn't you just go and edit the node to fix it yourself? And so I wonder if adding a manual label that forces it to resync then becomes a case of, oh, well, we forgot to add the label and therefore it's out of date again. And so the value of it becomes diminished because it becomes a manual step.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely fair pushback, right? My only response to that is that like things like instance type and region and whatnot, like we as as the SIG or whatever, we would like those to be controlled by the CCM, right? Like we would not be advising users to manually do them if the CCM can do it because it's the actual arbiter of knowledge there, right? So I would only say that, yeah, you're right. It does it like why wouldn't the user just fix the instance type while they're in there putting this label on? Like that, I mean, that's a great pushback, right? Chris, please.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Like on the Equinix Metal side, we found that like people couldn't figure out what should be in there, but the CCM could figure it out correctly. So we'd rather it do the lookup. But at the same time, a provider like Equinix Metal, this could be problematic if we made this to be like a required interface to implement, because like on the Equinix Metal side, which won't be an issue much longer, I suppose, the EC2 data never got updated in the future to reflect anything that changed about that host, which is like what can change on bare metal. But regardless, like I don't know if every cloud is maintaining that instance data very well. Hopefully they are, but probably can't force and count on it.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I think like at this point, it would have to be one of those opt-in kind of things where it's like, does your provider do this? Okay, good discussion on that, folks. Does anybody have any, I'm not sure that we have an action item coming out of this. Like, I think if it might be worthwhile to maybe do some investigation in the code if anyone has time to, just kind of see what's possible. But I think if we did anything to change this, we would certainly need some sort of enhancement to describe like what we wanted to do and so people could know how it works and everything. I guess Joel, like this doesn't really give you much of a something to walk away with, but
I think I've got some ideas for continuing the conversation internally and trying to work out what the actual RFE is in terms of actual time to work on something like this and actually make a proposal for, hey, SIG Cloud, we should change something. Probably not anytime soon.
that's kind of what it's sounding like. Unless there are people like busting out of the woodwork to kind of solve this problem.
But it also sounds like providers are already doing this on the AWS side, so maybe make it a provider issue.
Yeah.
Right.
I shared a PR. Do you think that helps? Because that was specifically added, like to add additional labels in the chat, like in the node controller, like where instance v2 can get these additional labels and add them to the node.
Cool. All right. Well, if there's no other discussion on that topic, then I think we've covered all of our regular agenda topics. Does anybody have any ad hoc topics they would like to bring up on the agenda? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands going up, so let's just check our triage issues to see if there's anything new that's been added. We had a flaking test 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure if we responded on that. We did, I guess we're waiting for more GCP, and it looks like Antonio's taking a look at it. Okay, I don't think we have anything else we need to do there. Just check the periodics to see if there's anything wild happening. I think we did have some failures that came up recently, so would not be surprised if we see something here. But it's looking fairly good. Well, we had a couple. I guess those were the failures they were talking about. It seems like we've gone back to storage. Okay. I'm guessing that these have already been taken care of. Okay. Well, I think that's it for today's meeting. See you all in 2 weeks. And if you have any comments about the annual report or would like to see something added to the annual report, please check out the PR that I listed here. I will probably mark it as ready for merging this Friday if nobody has any updates to it. So yes, thanks everybody. And yeah, see you in 2 weeks.